This section of the Diablo Range running north and south from Altamont Pass to Corral Hollow is sometimes called the neck of the Diablo Range. Biologically speaking, it's the narrowest choke point, a critical linkage for plants, animals, and people headed south. For years, Corral Hollow has been one of the few routes into the northern Diablo Range from the Central Valley. Grizzly Adams captured bears here in the late 1800s. Mountain lions are still present. From the hilltops, you can see the head of the range, Mount Diablo. Corral Hollow was probably named for a place where horses were confined on the edge of the San Joaquin Valley in the 1800s. For the Spanish, it was part of an inland route to Los Angeles, El Camino Viejo. Later, 49ers passed through on their way to the gold fields in the southern Sierra. Corral Hollow was never an easy place to live or raise livestock. The Irish immigrants who congregated here had to endure cold, windy winters, hot, dry summers, less than a dozen inches of rain per year, and of course, the occasional fire. Despite the challenges, Mark Connolly's family has been ranching here for 5 generations. He and his wife, Celeste Garamendi, raise beef cattle here on 9,000 acres of grassland, woodland, and chaparral. Part of the job, as they see it, is protecting the life and land around them. So they fence off ponds, move troughs, and rotate their 300-head Angus herd from field to field to avoid overgrazing. They protect habitat for kit foxes, red-legged frogs, and tiger salamanders through conservation easements. They work with the state to accommodate a herd of Thule elk that roams the property. They've opened their gates to scientists studying golden eagles. To minimize the ranch's carbon footprint, they're experimenting with selling grass-fed beef with no antibiotics or growth hormones directly to local consumers. Taking the lead on that project is a 5th generation of Connollys, their daughters Catherine and Bridget. The SCU fire arrived on August 16, 2020. It hit the ranch hard, over several days. Firefighters were too busy elsewhere to help them at first.
We got all of the fire cans that we could, the rakes, the shovels, and we had our 2 vehicles that we thought were well out of the distance, and that fire came up the last 50 yards just super fast, and we literally are running to get in the vehicles and drive them out of the way.
By this time, the fire was approaching their house. Not a moment too soon, state firefighters arrived, quickly lit a backfire, and created a safe space around the house. But the end of the fire wasn't the end of the battle. Months later, the fire continued to take a toll. Fences had burned down. Grass was gone in many fields, so they needed to buy hay. Devices to tap water from springs had been destroyed and needed to be repaired. Many springs weren't running, so they brought in water in trucks. Mark and Celeste were exhausted. They still had enough energy to hope, though, that spring would make things easier. The ranch has a long history of overcoming obstacles.
The ranch was homesteaded by my great-grandfather, Patrick Connolly, and then Patrick Joseph Connolly, his son, and then my father, Robert Connolly. And you could not survive 160 acres up here, but if you homesteaded it, then you could sell it to somebody who was going to stay. So it was expanded that way. And then in 1918, railroad heirs started selling off their holdings. And so the people who were around here then were able to purchase those holdings. In the 1930s, there was a statewide shift from sheep to cattle, and that happened here like everywhere else.
In the 1920s and 30s, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission tunneled under the Coast Range and the ranch to carry water from Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in Yosemite to San Francisco. In the process, they dried up the Connollys' main well. The commission built the Connollys a new well a mile away, but later a weapons testing site in Corral Hollow polluted the water table with industrial solvents and other chemicals. A cleanup followed, and the Connollys got a compensatory pond.
And then we had various Newtown projects. We had Carnegie Newtown, which we had to oppose because that was going to be in our border, and that's now in the Contra Costa Water District Preserve. Blocked that development. We had the Star Wars system, which the Corps of Engineers was going to condemn 5,000 to 6,000 acres for that Star Wars program, which went nowhere. It's a constant battle, constant battle. You spend your life trying to keep it together, operating as a unit.
And then there was the ranch's battle with off-highway vehicles. Right next door, Carnegie State Vehicular Recreation Area has been sparking fires, tearing up hillsides and silting waterways and ponds for years. Now the state was planning to expand Carnegie by 5 square miles on Connolly's northern border. The area included beautiful canyons and ridge tops, rare species, and important Native American and historic resources. For the ranch, the expansion would have been a costly nuisance. For the region, it would have meant the loss of an area so ecologically and culturally rich that a UC Berkeley study identified it as a top conservation priority for the entire state. Celeste Garamendi helped lead the opposition to the Carnegie expansion by organizing Friends of Tesla Park. Save Mount Diablo helped too, in one of its first steps south into the Diablo Range.
If you look down the ravine right in front of us, this is called the Mitchell Ravine, and it's a major watershed that feeds into the Corral Hollow Creek, but also the northern part of it is within what we identify and refer to as Tesla Park, which is planned for OHV recreation. If Tesla is opened up to OHV use, then that entire corridor is cut off by OHV recreation. It is directly in the path of the critical linkage habitat corridor, which is the lifeline of the Diablo Range.
2 decades of persistent lobbying paid off in September 2021 when Governor Gavin Newsom signed SB 155, which prohibited use of Tesla for off-highway vehicle recreation and kicked off a planning process for a new state park. On October 18th, public officials, ranchers, and conservationists gathered to celebrate.
Today's really a climate win amidst this climate crisis. This is a big, lasting climate win that we've done together. These stories need to get out, and we need to remind one another when we come together, we can do such great things for the natural world that we all depend upon for our survival.
2 years after that party, Garamendi joined scientists and friends from Save Mount Diablo for a BioBlitz at Tesla. The gathering, hosted by State Park staff, was aimed at learning more about the 3,100-acre site and celebrating the accomplishments of everyone who worked for protection, including Garamendi and the whole Connolly family. And their decades-long project continues. As we were making this video in the fall of 2023, the Tesla site had no official name and hadn't been open to the public. Garamendi and others were lobbying for a highly protective state reserve classification, and their favored name? Hizmet Warup, or Sacred Earth in the Chochenyo language of the East Bay Ohlone people.
No one entity is really big enough to take care of such a massive mountain range, so the Connollys are incredibly important partners in the protection of that area. They are conservation heroes.
People from the Bay Area generally head to the Central Valley over 700-foot Altamont Pass. 2 centuries ago, though, the Spanish used the 1,600-foot Pass of Good Winds, now known as Corral Hollow Pass. You can experience this historic route, a 30-mile drive from Livermore to Tracy. From I-580 in Livermore, wend your way south to Tesla Road. Follow that road up and over Corral Hollow Pass. On your right, bounded by Corral Hollow Creek, will be the spacious oak-studded site of our region's newest state park unit. While working to establish the state park land as a reserve, park activists called a Tesla for a historic town near where coal was discovered here in 1855. Producing in fits and starts and peaking as the largest source of coal in California at the turn of the century, the mine was closed in 1911. A little farther down the road on your right, you can't miss Carnegie State Vehicular Recreation Area, named for the historic town and a brick and pottery plant built here in 1902. After passing Site 300's offices on your left, you'll soon be heading toward I-5 and the town of Tracy. Here on the edge of the Central Valley, miners headed to the gold fields in the Sierra Nevada may have established a corral for their horses. At least that's one explanation for the name of this historic canyon, pass, road, and creek.